Good morning. I'm Harley Schlanger from the LaRouche Organization. It's October 15th, 2021, and this is your daily video update. Today I'm going to go straight to the questions because I think the questions take up some of the points that are most important to address. The first question is, what is the significance over the debate that seems to be going on with policymakers, Federal Reserve officials, and others as to whether this is a transitory inflation or a long-term inflation? Well, this is a typical case of a phony debate. There is inflation. The inflation is much larger than we're getting from the statistics. The idea that you can have a 40% jump in the price of gasoline, a quadrupling of the cost of natural gas, and it's still in the single digits in terms of the annual inflation rate, is a fraud. It's a statistical fraud. You know this from going shopping. Look at the cost of food and how that's going up. So instead of addressing the cause, which is the hyperinflationary money pumping that's been going on since September of 2019, that is months before the awareness of the coronavirus pandemic. They were pumping this money. Why? To protect the banking system. It's highly likely that around September 2019 there was a derivatives blowout, and the Federal Reserve stepped in with the repo markets to provide more and more liquidity. The liquidity in the form of credit, dollars, went to banks, not just U.S. banks, but foreign banks, including a large amount to Deutsche Bank, to Nomura Bank, to BNP Paribas, to a number of the other British banks, as well as especially JP Morgan Chase, Citibank, Bank of America, and others. The ostensible reason was to cover overnight corporate payments that had to be made, which is true. There was a lot because corporations are not making profits because they're not producing. They're making money from getting the free money from the Federal Reserve and buying stocks and speculating. But this money is much larger than just covering short-term corporate loans. And the hypothesis of the Wall Street on Parade is that this is going to cover a derivatives blowout. We'll have more on this as it comes up, but the obvious point is they don't want you to know this. They're trying to say that the inflation is because of supply chain problems, because of raw material shortages, and so on. All of that's true, but the driver of it is the hyperinflationary money printing combined with the move for the Green New Deal to end the era of fossil fuels, to stop the production of electricity from coal and nuclear, which will drive the prices up, which will make solar and wind power cost effective, at least compared to the high prices for the raw materials that they're not allowing to be mined and produced. So it's a fraud by the Federal Reserve officials to allow them time to figure out how the hell they're going to make it to the transition to the Great Reset when all power for spending is placed in the hands of the central banks operating on behalf of the private banks. So the idea of transitory inflation is like being a little pregnant. You have inflation or you don't. And if you have it, it's very, very difficult to stop short of precipitating a crash. Now, two related questions. Or actually, the next question is, why is China backing the COP26 agreement? Well, I would say that's not exactly true. The Chinese are making some sounds that they're willing to consider long-term carbon reduction, that they're prepared to go to the Glasgow conference, whereas it's not clear whether Putin's going to go. The Australian Prime Minister's not going. It's not clear what the Indians will do when they get there. But the Chinese are saying, well, we're working on a plan for 2060 reduction of carbon emissions. In the meantime, what's the China policy? It's directly counter to what COP26 is trying to do: reduce coal and reduce nuclear. Instead, the Chinese are expanding coal production and electricity production from coal, as well as from nuclear. Now, the fact that they pulled back in the short term from the coal production plants that they were putting in many of the countries that are part of the Belt and Road Initiative may have more to do with the ability to finance them in the short term than it does to a commitment to not go with coal. The question here is, will the general idea of the Green New Deal, which is to reduce the capability of man to produce the electricity needed to power a modern industrial and agricultural economy, will that be pushed through at the Glasgow conference or not? At present, it looks like it will not be pushed through. You can see the panic coming from The Economist magazine and from various speakers on behalf of the climate change ideology. They're completely paranoid that the higher prices of energy and electricity will undermine the ability to demand further cuts in efficient energy production and replacement of the inefficient sources such as solar and wind. So when the Chinese make statements that they're willing to discuss this, they're engaged in a discussion, just keep in mind when John Kerry, who's Biden's energy czar, went to China, he came back pretty much empty-handed. Yes, the Chinese said they won't be funding in the immediate term coal plants in various countries, but he didn't get them to commit to shutting down coal production or electrical production from coal in China. In fact, that's going to be ramped up. So you have to be very careful with what you're reading, because there's an attempt to manage the news, and that includes from China as well. And when they're trying to present a picture of being cooperative and willing to talk, which is also important, even if they do not go with the full package, there's no way to force an economy as large as China to accept the draconian austerity that's part of the COP26 conference. Now, the other questions, there's one from Canada. I want to see things change quickly. I want to see building. I want to see manufacturing and so on. But I don't see it happening. Do I need to learn to be more patient, or is there a way to speed up the revival of building infrastructure and manufacturing? And a related question was someone who just said, what can I do to help with the mobilization to get back to the Constitution? Well, there's no precise formulation as to when things will change. You fight for change. You have to be impatient at the same time you're patient. The problem we have is that there are policymakers who are corrupt, who are part of a criminal cabal that are using speculative finances and media manipulation, controlling the narrative, to convince you that you have no choice except to submit to the globalized policy of a destruction of real energy, destruction of the physical economy, and so on. So there are many people who don't like this, who are rebelling against it, but don't know quite what to do. Now, my recommendation is that you download from the Schiller Institute site a series of documents that we've been producing. One is on a video on a conference where we laid out that there is no energy crisis. There is no climate crisis, rather. That's available at schillerinstitute.com. It was from, I think, July 29th, but a very distinguished panel discussing the fraud, the ideological fraud of so-called man-made climate change. At the same time, we have a new report out on the development of I'll get the exact title here for a second, I keep forgetting, The Coming U.S. Economic Miracle on the New Silk Road, which is an update on a report we had earlier on creating 1.5 billion productive jobs worldwide. The point is, the program is there. The opposition to the Great Reset and the Green New Deal of the globalist oligarchs from Davos, the opposition is there, the resistance is there. The question is mobilizing it in an effective way to challenge the narratives that are out in the media and from the political establishment which means we need more people to understand exactly what the fraud is and why it's being pushed. And it's being pushed not because the other side is so powerful, but because they're so desperate. They're losing their control. The withdrawal from Afghanistan was a recognition that there's no military solution to the problems we face in the world. And what are these problems? Well, where does terrorism come from? It comes from underdevelopment. It comes from deliberate deployment of networks to carry out acts that will destabilize countries and that will recruit angry people into anarchistic or destructive actions. Our job is to give people hope for the future by showing them what could be done and how they cannot allow themselves to submit to the arbitrary force that's behind this so-called rules-based order. How will it go quickly? Well, at some point, this whole system is going to crash down on the heads of the people who are trying to do this, or there will be systemic rebellions that will make it impossible for them to continue, in which case the question is there an alternative in place? Are enough people aware of what Lyndon LaRouche has done over the years to expose that what green policy is not about the environment, but about fascist economics, and to counter that with a revival of the American system? And for that, come to our websites, theschillerinstitute.com and the LaRoucheOrganization.com. Study these ideas. Become a leader in your community. And don't stop organizing. The key to winning this fight, as Lyndon LaRouche once said, is they can't beat me because I'm never going to quit. And I think that's a good slogan for us going ahead in the future. So thanks for joining me today, and I'll be back on Monday.